I should introduce myself. I am Hannah Peterson, and before I worked with EMI, I did work in the U.S. Air Force in data acquisitions, diesel generator work at Cummins, and solar power with Fronius and Newsun. So I have 10 years of industry experience before I joined EMI, and then I've been with EMI about 5 years. And I am an associate staff. I'm with the U.S. office, but right now I'm based in Africa. So, I mean, at the moment, obviously, I'm not in Africa. I'm here on a visit to the U.S. So I'm going to talk about why we're doing this type of work, like what's motivated us to take this step, and then what our process is right now, step by step, and how you can get involved in these types of projects. The why of this is we were finding that EMI clients were struggling when we handed them off designs and actually implementing them. So we would hand off this great electrical design that was really relevant to them for the context and everything, but actually finding a contractor that would follow that design was difficult for them. Holding them actually accountable to the design, finding a good quality contractor in the first place, even going from that conceptual design that we handed them to the detailed design with a local contractor, or even making sure they're getting what they paid for when the contractor finishes, it really felt impossible to many of our clients without expertise training in the electrical work. So they'd hire someone, they would do it completely different, but they weren't even really sure. They're like, I don't think they followed your design, but we're not sure. And so we're just making ourselves available to follow through after we've done that conceptual design, helping them through getting that detailed, part by part list, do these parts actually match what we put in the design, and then moving into that construction, overseeing as an owner's rep that construction process, and then even coming and doing commissioning and training for operating and maintaining the system. So this is huge for the clients that we're working with, and we would love to do a ton of more of these projects. We only have limited bandwidth, so we need a lot more help. So if you know any electrical engineers that are interested in this type of work, we'd love to have more help. The first step of the whole process is to do an initial site assessment. So this is what you basically do in the typical EMI electrical project when you're going out to a site for the first time. We do detailed single line diagrams, electrical site layouts. We understand what the client sees as their electrical issues. We look for safety issues while we're on site. We understand the future site expansions, new electrical loads, and we collect a ton of power analyzer data, load data, as much as possible. At that point, we then move into conceptual design, and this is all part of that project trip. We create a load study, we do energy source cost analysis like we went over in the previous training that I did. We do initial voltage drop calculations to see where they may have voltage drop issues. We propose future single line and electrical site layouts based on that. All of this is under what we normally would do with a regular EMI trip. After we leave and we hand off that conceptual design is where it really changes when it comes to this owner's rep electrical work. Usually the next step is getting funding for the project. So we've given them all these ideas of here's things that we think you should change, but they have to actually find the resources to implement those. And that is up to the client to secure the funding for the project. Right now, we don't have any internal grant writer, but we often do get questions, or we've had people send us a grant proposal and say, hey, can you just read this technical part and make sure I've got it accurate to what you are proposed to us. And sometimes that's just internal funding approvals and it's not even a grant. But USAID, Helmsley, Deichmann, the funding sources are many, but somehow that funding has to be secured for us to go on to the next step. At that point, after they acquire the funding, we then start trying to find or assess contractors that are capable of doing the work that we've requested. And in-country is preferred. We always try to look for someone who is as close as possible and still competent to do the work. And this often requires in-person visits or interviews, especially in this context. In the US, you might be able to go on the phone and ask them for a bunch of drawings, But in the developing world, it is really important to do that in-person meeting, going even to construction sites and asking, hey, who's the contractor for this? Point us to them, visiting electrical shops and asking them, hey, can you give us some references of contractors you know are in the area? And then we look at past projects they've done, try to assess, are they teachable? Are they willing to learn? Are they willing to train people after they do the installation? Things like that. Why? Why do we want the local contractor? Why don't we just hire somebody in the US to do the detailed design, put all US parts in, ship it over in a container? This is the approach of some people in the missions world, but we feel like it's not very sustainable because you put in a bunch of parts that are very unique to the US or Germany or wherever, and then you can't always find easy replacement parts for subcomponents that fail. In addition, the costs are less to try to use the local contractors in the process, especially in that construction process. After they've designed it and they're looking for labor, we try to emphasize that they use local labor as much as possible. It also keeps the economic benefit in the country. We've worked with engineers. We were just sitting down with a group in Zambia, and there are engineers there who have degrees, but they say, I can't find any work because all of the projects that you see getting built everywhere, all the engineering's done by the Chinese or by the US people or whatever, and so they don't even have the opportunity to use that skill. And so we don't want to put countries in that position where, like, to help them actually develop, we have to allow them to do some of that engineering and work with them to learn that skill as well. And so we come alongside those engineers that are in country, and then basically it's not an internship in that way, but it's like we're giving them additional help to bring them up a little bit in their technical ability as well. Those local resources are really invaluable to us too, in that they bring a lot of understanding of the local resources as far as what products are very commonly used in that area, what sizes of things are so common in that area. They may know pitfalls of suppliers that have a bad reputation in that area and things like that. And they understand the site constraints sometimes better than we do because they've been in that country for a long time. So they may understand even relationships with the utility, ways that business needs to be done, things like that that speed the process up. In addition, the liability falls on the design-build firm, and EMI is not looking to take on that liability in any number of countries. So the design-build firm also becomes the local knowledge for ongoing maintenance and technical issues as well. And that's important because we don't want to just come in and install something and then leave and they have no one to call. And we don't want to be the person they're calling for all of the troubleshooting of the system in the future. We want to bring in someone who's local, who understands the system well enough that if something does break or they have any issues, they can call that local contractor and hopefully, or at least those local contacts, even if they're working for a new contractor, to try to get the issue resolved. We already talked about having the local contractor helps to use local materials. So they have a better knowledge of, even if it's not local, they know what in general is used there and what they'll be able to repair. Another key player in this process is identifying a local EMI representative. This has been a little different for each project that we've done. I wanted to, as I go through this, try to highlight how it worked for a particular project in Kayuma, Tanzania. On this previous one, for the local contractor, we ended up using a South African contractor, which is not as local as we would have wished. But the person who was evaluating contractors for us, who is our local EMI representative, he went and surveyed all the contractors he could find in Dar es Salaam and just felt like none of them were going to be able to handle the particular level of expertise and design that was necessary for this particular project because it was a microgrid. Neil on the left was our local representative for that project. This is not the same as the contractor. You want to have someone who's external, who basically doesn't have a conflict of interest with the contractor. So you can have the contractor who's actually maybe doing, and this is more important during the construction phase, but it also needs to be during the design. But there's someone who can be that basically local liaison with the ministry to answer those questions and get that you need in order to design this system, and also hold the contractor accountable to the design, sending photos back and things like that for checks as we're going along the process. EMI doesn't physically go to the site every month or every week or whatever. I can't be traveling to every site all the time. So having that local person there who is also going to continue after the project, hopefully, in a connection with that site, helps in the maintenance of that system and in installing it well in the first place. It's good that that person has some technical knowledge. So this isn't just an administrative person. It's best if they have at least like a technician background or some level of engineering or something like that, so they are comfortable with doing inspections and asking tough questions of contractors. Like I said, they're basically the on-site quality control during the construction. So they also have to be a personality that's politically kind of kind, like in the sense of like knows how to motivate the contractors without causing a lot of relational problems with the ministry too. So like they need to be technically competent, but also like somebody who's pretty good with people. They have to be able to participate in EMI teleconferences. So we have conference calls with the contractor every week, and then we have internal EMI conference calls every week for these projects that are in this mode. And that's where we invite people to join in those projects and follow them through to provide that technical input from EMI. At that point, when we've done the contractor, like we've looked and said, these are some good contractors that we think are in the area, then we start, and we've identified a good local representative. We create documentation that we need to actually do an official request for quote. And so this is based on the local contractor. It can be a detailed design and construction, or we can break it into two pieces and just have one contractor bid on the detailed design first, and then do another submit for bid for the construction later. This involves writing a statement of work and requirements documents, and this defines in detail what the contractors are actually bidding on. So it'll include like the single line diagrams and the layouts, but it will also include things like all the grounds have to be under 5 ohms or 24 ohms, and you must use materials that are compatible with, you don't put aluminum and copper together. It just has a bunch of different detailed kind of design requirements for the system, even how it's to be operated, etc. And then we review and edit the conceptual design, if needed, that came from the initial project team that came out. So sometimes that's excellent, and sometimes there may be some changes that need to be made to that before we would go into detailed design and construction. At that point, when we have those documents ready, we send that out to, I would say the top 3 contractors is ideal that have indicated verbally that they want to bid on it. So ideally you're going to find 3 contractors that you think are competent enough and local, and ask all of them to do a quote on it to see who submits the best. It's not just the best price, but the best information. You're trying to also evaluate their ability to deliver even products through how they respond to the quote. This includes the SOW with drawings requirements. That's what we hand off to them. And we're expecting an itemized quote, and this allows us to just kind of get a gauge for are they in the right ballpark or not. There's been contractors where they send back a bid and we're looking at the price of even a transformer, and it's like, wait a minute, I can get those in the capital for 1/5 of that price. Why are you bumping the prices up that much? You expect some margin, but you're just trying to catch. Unfortunately, in some of the developing world, you have companies that want to basically take advantage. It's a family connection, and they're used to getting a lot of money for not maybe delivering as much. So we're trying to evaluate by having them itemize the quote, and we can actually separate items out and say, is that reasonable numbers for like the solar panels or transformer, et cetera. At that point, the payment schedule is based on completion of deliverables as well, and there are penalties for late completion. We found, unfortunately, in some of the contexts we work, that people have had bad experiences with, well, we award a contract and then we give them this big lump sum of money and they do nothing, and then they suddenly say, well, we can't do any more work because we ran out of money. And it's like, where did the money go? Nothing actually happened. And how do you hold them accountable? So we basically make it, stepwise. It's not like you just get all the money and you do the work. It's, okay, do this much, and then we'll give you that much. And there's multiple different milestones, and they get money as they go along. And that helps them to keep going and help kind of manage the money as well, the flow of money. The penalties for late completion, we found that, at least on projects so far, those always get imposed, because it seems like in the context we're working, they're always late by the long shot. But it gives you a motivator. It gives you a something you can leverage for even change orders, things that you didn't expect, that you didn't put in the contract. And you can say, well, maybe we'll take away that penalty if you put in these things for free or whatever. But it had some accountability. Yes, we do. The schedule right now, I think we asked for it as a deliverable after the award contract, like immediately after. And I think I'm not sure if it's all the project, but I think that's the way we've been doing it. We struggle with getting the detail in that schedule that we might want. On one project, actually, I take that back, on the Zambia project, I knew that we'd struggle with it before, so I just provided them a schedule. But then the disadvantage of that is, a lot of these, it's tough because it's like, do you even make a schedule because they're not going to meet it? But at least it gives some motivation, or at least some list of like, these are the deliverables. And at the minimum, you're putting the deliverables in a list, and you're giving like at least some time frame for the order that it should be done. And at least there's some, maybe asking them to set the dates, might have been better. I don't know. It's tough because it's the context. Time is not, being on time is not maybe as high a priority to them, and we are also overburdened with work, and so we don't always have the time to be like getting back to them the hour after they send us a single line for review. These projects take longer, but we feel like the product is better because you are getting the local contractor involved, you're bringing them up to speed, and you're using local products, and there's that oversight element that is really valuable. So we feel like the extra time is worth the effort, because we've seen so many disasters when do it other ways, so for different reasons. Once we get the quotes back, we review those and we select the contractor for the detail design and construction, depending on if they were combined. This is based on, did they even provide the information we requested? We've gotten quotes back that they're not even providing an itemized quote, and we clearly requested that. So they're not serious, or maybe they're not who we want to work with. Are the itemized prices reasonable? We talked about that. If they're way high, that's a red flag. What are their past projects? What do they look like? The in-person interviews and phone interviews are really important. And I would say at least 2 serious bids to compare, and ideally 3. We then enter like the detailed design process, and like I said, these are weekly EMI internal calls, weekly contractor calls, project schedule reviews, trying to hold them accountable and pushing them to keep going. And EMI is very involved in the detailed design process. This is not maybe in the US you could be very hands-off and just say, all right, go for it. When you're done, give us the full design. We are reviewing everything they create. So if they say, okay, we're going to work on the single line, we say, okay, well, give us your first draft. And in fact, on Zambia, we did that. We didn't just say deliver the final. It's like, show us your first draft on this day, and we're going to review it, and then we'll review another one, because we found they need more continuous input, and the process is just going to take a lot more communication. We found that that's really essential, and having those weekly contractor calls are probably the best way to motivate them to just say, okay, what's the next deliverable? You're going to get this to us next week, and they may not get it to you quite when you want it, but you're just sitting there pushing them through the process and trying to make sure that the quality of what they're delivering is really worth the money that is being paid. And then we pre-approve the process if there's a construction that's separate contract. During construction installation, the EMI on-site rep is absolutely essential at this point. There has to be somebody on site. And we've had some sites that kind of argue with us, like, oh, do we really need somebody there? And it's like, no, you really do. If you don't hire somebody, go ahead and find someone that can help to oversee and be the quality control on site for us. We've also found during this process we need to track all the financials in progress. EMI is the one that gives the final approval for payments. So if we do not think that their quality is sufficient to pay for the design, we don't pay. Or maybe we say you're at 75%, go ahead and release the funds for the 75%, but we're going to withhold 25% because your design is not complete. It's not up to the quality that is required. So this really helps our clients because it's hard for them to evaluate what is good enough and what isn't, and we can, with our technical know-how, we have a better ability to evaluate that. We also document any deviations or change orders through this process, and we are constantly getting photos from that EMI on-site representative and reviewing them and making sure that things are getting installed properly. We do periodic visits throughout it, but like I said, we can't be there every week, so that on-site person is really essential. The next step is doing commissioning inspection and reviewing the final product. The contractor provides commissioning documentation, and sometimes that's a struggle to get them to, if maybe they haven't done a commissioning process before, but they provide that information. EMI representative will do an initial inspection and provide like photos and snag lists of here's things I see, and then we're going and doing a follow-up inspection to say, are there other items that he's missed or she's missed? The final, I think this is the final step, is giving the operations and maintenance training. And this is really important. It might not seem it because you think, oh, electrical, we just install it and then it works. It's wires, what could go wrong? But we've found that a lot of the maintainers on these sites have had just not as much training opportunity as we have in the US. And so, and they're also not as literate, they're not as good of readers, so just handing them a big manual, it feels overwhelming, more to them than it does to us. I mean, a manual's overwhelming to an American, but you take it to someone who's can't read very well, and it's just like, okay, you might as well just not give me a manual. So taking the time to give them some basics on operating and maintaining the system is really important. I have been to sites where, for example, they installed an oxygen plant in a hospital, and they were struggling because it started leaking oil, and it really hadn't been installed that long, but they just hadn't been told how to maintain it. So what was potentially kind of normal maintenance and a little bit of an installation issue, they didn't really know what to even do because that side wasn't thought of in the funding process, that they actually needed to train them. So we're trying to include that because we've seen the importance of it. And this also instills the values of safety and longevity. In these trainings, we're trying to communicate how to safely interact with these systems because they often haven't been given training on how to safely interact, and to instill in them that things need to last a long time and that they own these items. It is their system and that they need to try to maintain them. That it isn't just, well, this was a gift from somebody and so I'll just let it run until it falls apart. No, there's maintenance need to be done, and it's yours, and it's your responsibility to take care of it well, because it's like all things, it's a gift from God in a sense, and we take care of those things well. We train as many as possible. We ask for a wide, kind of cast a wide net. In Cayuma, we did 30 trainees. At the end, we were able to provide leadership with a list of names in roughly 3 tiers. And the reason for doing this this wide training is a lot of times when you go to site, they'll say, well, it's not Bob, but it's Blessing or whatever their name is. He's our electrician. Why do we need to train anybody else? But the problem in Africa is that knowledge is not shared, for one. So if he leaves, they're really out of luck. And he may or may not be the most qualified person as far as innate ability to do that job. He may not be able to handle maintaining everything. There's all sorts of issues that come in. So we just said, send everybody, send anybody with a technical background, they had a VOTEC there, send some VOTEC students, even send some of your administrators, because they need to understand the importance of maintaining it so that they'll actually fund the maintenance of the system. So educating a broader group of people on how to operate and maintain the system is a good thing. Like I said, we at the end said, these are people we highly recommend to work on this system. We think these people are really picking up on how to operate this. These people, okay, they're all right. And then these others, don't ever have them work on electrical, basically. They're not picking this up. We really are using very basic training, assuming almost no knowledge, and some people just aren't able to pick it up. So we're evaluating both on natural aptitude and knowledge, but it gives them a broader group of people that they can hire from. Like I said, it's designed for students with little knowledge or electrical systems. We use methods that are easily attainable for those from more oral backgrounds. What that means is for people that are not really good readers. A lot of these cultures, they can't really afford a lot of books. So maybe they've learned how to read in school, but they aren't reading magazines. They aren't reading books for pleasure. They're not reading constantly like we are in the US. And so it's much slower for them and much more difficult for them to be having to read a lot. So we use a lot of images, we use a lot of hands-on, and we're making sure that we translate everything into the local language throughout the training as well. We also include some essential O&M skills that we take for granted in the US. Reading charts was a real challenge when we did the training in Tanzania. It's not something they'd done before. Filling out a checklist, an O&M checklist by date, and saying, okay, I'm gonna keep track of what I'm doing every month. We're introducing concepts. It's not just how do I fix this item, but it's like how do I do maintenance in a general sense as well. And what are those building blocks that enable them to do good maintenance? We include simplified drawings and diagrams, photos and symbols more than text, and hands-on throughout. We were constantly going in and out of the classroom to try to keep them engaged and make sure they were making the connections between what they were seeing in symbols and photos to physically what was on their site. We use decks of flashcards with a photo on one side, a function on the back, analogies, lots of repetition in the classroom, lots of classroom quizzing, and lots of peer training. So these are all just trying to make the training attainable to them and not intimidating. Even with like the flashcards, it gives you a way to quiz them without them taking a written test, because you'll find if you give them a written test in these contexts, oftentimes they're going to do very poorly. We don't necessarily care if they can take a test. We just want to know, do they know the information? Are they picking it up? So we're having them use flashcards, and I'll like say, hey, put all the flashcards that have to do with solar power on your table, and they'll pick the ones out. And if I'm seeing that like this person is consistently not understanding, they're not putting the right cards out, then that's basically saying they're not getting it and they're going to be in the lower tier of the class, but they don't feel like they're taking a test and they don't have to write out answers. They're just naturally revealing to you their level of competence. Analogies, just using everyday analogies like maintaining their own car or their own motorcycle to help them understand how to maintain something. And peer training is once we get to a certain point in the class, we'll have them train each other. So we'll ask like, hey, Joe, can you teach these 4 guys about solar or about the battery system? Guide them through a single line. And that definitely reveals their level of knowledge as well. In this training, we also are very intentional about sharing Jesus through it, and that was one of my favorite parts about it. Every morning, we would start with a song. In this case, Hakuna Mungu Kama Wewe, which is There's No One Like Jesus in Swahili, and a Bible story shared by one of the members of the team. That was just a really cool way to integrate our faith into it, to just say we love Jesus and we want you to know him too. Kayuma is probably 90% Muslim or something. It's in the higher percents in this particular region of Tanzania. So it was just cool to have that opportunity. And just our ability to demonstrate patience and love and kindness and humility in all of our interactions with contractors, all the way through the design process with the client, with the technicians on site. All of those things are testimony to who Jesus is in us and through us. So I think this is a really cool part about doing the owner's rep type of work, that we get to integrate the gospel into it more. And we're always praying for everyone and everything, asking God to make himself known through the project. So offering up prayer to individuals as needs arise, like if the contractor is ill or has someone ill in their family, we can offer to pray for them, and we're praying that God will use every part of what we're doing. So far, I don't feel like I've actually seen that too much, as far as there being like subs, like anything too crazy. Honestly, at least for Zambia, Tanzania, and I believe India as well, once you assign that contract to them, they do everything. Now, there, in a sense, was a subcontractor in that for the systems on site, but that's reasonable. Like the one that's going to deliver the generator sets, the diesel generators, or the contractor who's going to deliver the battery system and get it up and running. But that's almost not even a contractor. It's like a manufacturing sort of thing. That's a good point to bring up. Is something we should always be, I guess, cautious of, and to keep in mind as we're finding. You certainly don't want to get in that situation. We want direct contact with those who are doing the design. And actually, one of the lessons learned from the Kayuma project in Tanzania was that even our relationship with Tesla, I felt frustrated by it, because we were trying to put the contractor in the middle and say, well, we'll just do everything through the main contractor. And I could easily, we'd be asking a question of the contractor, and they would just be like, oh, Tesla's not giving this information, or, they'd always blame Tesla. But then whenever I contacted Tesla directly, they would get the information right away. And so I realized, I think they're just, I don't know what it is. They have a bad relationship with them, what was going on. But we realized if you have a subcontractor like that in the future, that we just can't do that. We've got to say, no, we need them to be involved in our design meetings. And that's totally reasonable. You can ask subcontractors if you're going through a lot of design with them, to be involved in periodic teleconferences. And like I said, it can be the same contractor, design build, or we can break it into two. And we found sometimes contractors aren't willing to bid it as a design build. It's maybe too overwhelming, and so they're willing to do just the detailed design. Now, why are we doing detailed design is more, I think what you were maybe mentioning was getting down to the actual parts list of what's local, and getting down to like where the stay is going to be. Like when we deliver the conceptual, we're saying these are rough wire sizes, this is the layout of the system. We've done the load analysis, so we've sized things, but they need to actually find a generator that meets those specs and do all the more detailed drawings. So,
have you ever done what they call design assist, where you take the detailed design to some level like 65%. Then you bring a contractor in and hire them. Based on that 65%, they can give you a pretty good price. And then the contractor has input to the designers for the products they want to use, and it all gets approved. But that way they have a little bit of ownership, and they have some flexibility to maybe offer some value engineering or whatever.
Is that more on that? So you think that would come in, like basically after you've done the conceptual and the detailed, then like in that construction process, basically?
Well, yes, it would be like in DoD projects you might be familiar with. There's a 35, 65, 95, whatever. At the 65% stage, basically all the pieces and parts are there. Some of the details aren't there.
Yeah.
But you hire a contractor, and then they partner with the designer, the detailed designer, to take it on through to 100%.
To construction.
Well, right, and on through construction.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we haven't done that specifically, and I think we're still in the learning process as far as, and honestly, I think we'll forever be in a learning process because each site has been slightly different, and the contractors we found have been slightly different, and yeah, it's always that struggle of like, well, how much do we have them do? And we've struggled with when do we hand it off? You know, how far do we take the conceptual design? Because some things are easier for them to do than others. It's easier for them to like find the local wire, but doing voltage drops has been tough for contractors. So we've thought maybe we should just do all the voltage drops before we hand it off. So yeah, it's a process for sure. And we'd love to have people with more experience to join these projects and help us to continue to improve the process because it's definitely a need. Yeah. We review every piece of material before they purchase it. So we ask for spec sheets. Now, we do the best we can, as in the sense of they're providing a spec sheet. We are not going on site and actually like taking metal samples and like, I don't know, taking things apart and trying to make sure. But we are looking at every detail of what they send us and evaluating, is this good enough? Is this not good enough to be used? So like they'll send us a generator specification and we'll say, yes, this meets it, or this doesn't look good enough. Go back and ask for something else. Yeah, there is an element of trust, and we are trying to stick to main brand names. And now, I mean, there's always the person who's putting the name that we all know and selling it under something else, but we're trying to say, the contractor understands that we do want the name, we want recognized name brands in this industry, and we want you to buy it from a reliable supplier. If something gets snuck in, I don't know that we would catch absolutely every. Yeah, so certainly that's part of why having the technical EMI contact and taking lots of photos is too. We're trying to catch those things the best we can, but I think we're always open to, advice. If you're like, you know what, I found that all the bad breakers have this mark on them or whatever, then we're, always open to tips of here's a way to tell if this is bad or, yeah. I think, and you're always learning through the process, I think, what to require and what not to require too. I know on Cayuma, we realized after the generators were delivered and they gave us the nameplate, we had all the specs were right and all the parts were right, but I realized that the engine part had been sitting for 5 years before it had been installed. I was like, this isn't good, and so we said, you're gonna have to run it under a high load, as high as possible, to try to burn off anything that's just gummed up in there. But then they were like, well, there's not enough load on the site, and so in hindsight, we were like, we should have put that in the SOW, and so next time, okay, in the SOW, we've got to put this. It's obvious, no competent person would have, given us this, but we've got to write it in there. It's got to be an engine that's within a year or something, so you just kind of learn as you're going along, okay, we got to put that requirement in there next time because we didn't think of it. So if you're trying to do it fast, if you want it to be done tomorrow, then you're going to have to hire some really expensive, big company to come in, and you're going to use probably, I don't know, you may use more I don't know that you necessarily have to use American products, but you might end up using products that aren't local, and you just come in, ship it all in, and install it. But we feel like there are advantages to doing it maybe a less costly way by using local contractors, and we hope it's a more sustainable way. Like, we hope that by having the locals actually install their own system and maintain, like they're kind of learning in the process, and you're hopefully building up capability locally. We feel like there are lots of needs out there for these types of projects, and there's always a lack of enough volunteers. So if you have any interest at all in supporting one of these projects, we'd love to have you join. It is more of a commitment than like a project trip with EMI. You just go for 2 weeks and then maybe you do a little design work afterwards. Whereas this type of work, we really need people who are willing to call in every week for an hour or two and give design feedback and continue the project to completion. So like I said, 2 to 5 hours per week, depending on how much time you have in the project, and then site visits involved to do like evaluations along the way, inspections, giving training, doing the commissioning. So that's the end of the presentation. So do you have any questions in addition?